Hey everybody, this is my thoughts on the Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 2022 open beta on PC. That was a bit of a handful there, but this is the upcoming Call of Duty game being developed primarily by Infinity Ward and of course published by Activision, and it's slated to release in late October of this year, which gives them about a month or so to address any issues or concerns that people had with the beta. Now this beta was technically split into two parts. The first part was actually last week, and that was the PlayStation 4 and 5 exclusive beta. And then this week we had the beta being opened up to the PC and Xbox platforms as well, in addition to being open to PlayStation players. Crossplay was enabled, and I was playing this with people on Xbox and PlayStation, and it all seemed to work perfectly fine, much like it did with the previous Call of Duty games going back to Modern Warfare 2019, so they don't really seem to have any major issues with that. And actually, there really weren't all that many issues that were really noteworthy in my time messing around with the beta. I had the graphics cranked up to maximum and was getting well over 100 frames per second at nearly all times. I didn't really run into any major glitches or anything like that, just some occasional graphics bugs as well as some occasional crashes, which don't really bother me all that much during a beta. Now, of course, if the game's still having crashing issues when the full version rolls around, that's another story entirely. But during a beta, it doesn't bother me that much, especially considering that they were just simple crashes to desktop. It would throw an error, and then after restarting the game, it would work perfectly fine. And in fact, that was really the only major technical problem I ran into during the beta, and they'll probably get that fixed up by launch. Obviously, if it launches and it's still having crashing issues, then I will hold them to task for that, but again, not that concerning at the moment. They've still got time to sort some of those issues out. I did have one odd issue where I'm not really sure what happened, but for whatever reason, my resolution scaling got messed up. So I had set it to 100% resolution scaling because I'm just playing this at 1080p anyway. But for some reason, when I initially set that, it didn't actually take. It was still sitting at around 50% or so. So I was playing the game and it was looking all blurry and hazy, and I really wasn't sure why, so I was looking through a couple of the other settings like motion blur and depth of field and stuff like that, and thinking maybe that was the problem, and for whatever reason, I didn't notice that it had gone back down to about 50% resolution scaling until later on after I had recorded a few more matches. And then I noticed that and fixed it, so the rest of the footage from then on out looks fine. So apart from a few crashes and some occasional glitches here and there really weren't any major technical problems to speak of, so they're definitely in a good position to get all of that sorted out by the time the game launches. But the real question here is whether or not the game itself is shaping up to actually be any good or not. Especially considering how downright terrible the last game was. That was, of course, Call of Duty Vanguard, which I did a review of a short while ago, so if you're curious about that one, go watch that video. As far as Modern Warfare 2 2022 goes, though, this is a direct sequel to Modern Warfare 2019, and it definitely feels like that. There is a lot of carryover between the two games, both from the engine itself being the same, but of course updated and modified, as well as things like the weapon handling animations, which look very similar, if not nearly identical, to ones that were in Modern Warfare 2019, where it is of course appropriate, and those of course looked great in Modern Warfare 2019, so it's not really a problem here. And of course, since it is not only a direct sequel, but takes place in the very near future, effectively, you're going to be seeing a lot of the same kinds of weapons, stuff like M4s, MP5s, Glocks, that sort of thing. Of course, all named wildly different things, presumably so they don't have to deal with copyright issues or whatever. But much like with Modern Warfare 2019, they have done a great job at modeling and animating all of these weapons down to very small, minute details, and that really does go the extra mile there. And much like with Modern Warfare 2019, they actually have some pretty solid, chunky, beefy sound effects. And between all of that and the feedback you get from hitting targets and the recoil of the weapons and such like that, it all makes the gunplay feel fantastic, much like with Modern Warfare 2019. It becomes abundantly clear the more you play the beta that this really is an iterative sequel, not some sort of major overhaul for the series like Modern Warfare 2019 was compared to Black Ops 4. And while this will of course lead people who hate Call of Duty on principle to say, oh, it's just the same game all over again, not really. They've definitely made some pretty significant changes to at least the multiplayer progression and the way the perks work, And they've also made some slight tweaks here and there to the core mechanics to just make them more refined and just feel generally better. Things like tweaking how the weapons feel compared to their Modern Warfare 2019 counterparts just a bit, or tweaking the time to kill overall so it is slightly slower than it was in Modern Warfare 2019, which actually puts it pretty much spot on for this type of game. But other changes are more noticeable right off the bat, like the map designs in this definitely being more refined than they were in Modern Warfare 2019. Admittedly, a lot of the maps in Modern Warfare 2019 really weren't very good, but at least they weren't the same 3-lane garbage we had had from pretty much every Call of Duty game for a long time up to that point, and which unfortunately Black Ops Cold War went back to. But with Modern Warfare 2 2022, the maps are in the same vein as what we saw in Modern Warfare 2019, where they were more modeled after actual places as opposed to just being clear 3-lane arenas, only they clearly put some effort into making sure the maps actually flow well in Modern Warfare 2 2022, at least the ones for the standard game modes. The much bigger maps that you play in the Invasion and Ground War modes definitely could use some tweaking in that regard, but they flow pretty decently all things considered, and to be fair, they're designed for much larger player counts and they work quite well for those player counts. So as far as the maps and the general core mechanics go, they've mostly just made some tweaks and slight improvements here and there to Modern Warfare 2019, which is not necessarily a problem. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. One thing I wish they hadn't kept compared to Modern Warfare 2019, however, is the kill streak system. I would much rather it have gone back to a score streak system instead, but we're stuck with kill streaks again. So people are going to be incentivized to just run around padding their KD ratios instead of actually playing the objective, which is a chronic issue with Call of Duty games. But there were actually two elements of gameplay that they did make some pretty significant changes to, and those are the perks as well as the general progression system. So as far as the perks go, they've done something fairly interesting here. The first thing I noticed was that all of the perks were unlocked right from the start. You didn't have to level up for any of them. I'm not sure if the full version is going to be set up the same way, but if it is, that's a good thing. You do still have to get to level 4 to unlock the gunsmith and create a class and all of that, and thus be able to mess around with the perk slots and such, but we didn't have to actually unlock any of the perks through the level grinding like we had to do in previous Call of Duty games. All of the perks were available from the start, and we have 4 perk slots this time around instead of only 3. The thing they've done with this that's actually quite interesting is that you have 2 basic perk slots that you get right from the beginning of the match, and you have them throughout, and then you have a bonus and an ultimate perk. In addition to the bonus and ultimate perks having more powerful individual effects than the effects you see from the perks in the basic slot, they also aren't available right at the beginning of the match. They have timers that go down from the start of the match and eventually will allow you to have that perk throughout the remainder of the match. So your bonus perk unlocks after 4 minutes, and your ultimate perk unlocks after 8 minutes. You can reduce these timers by scoring points. So the idea is that you go in and you play the objective, or you go for kills, or whatever the case may be, and the more of that you do, the faster you're going to gain access to your bonus and ultimate perks. The thing is, that seems like a pretty significant change to the perks system compared to what we saw in the previous games, but in practice you gain access to the bonus and ultimate perks so quickly that it really is just a gimmick. It's nice to have 4 perk slots, don't get me wrong, but the whole timer-based unlocking of the bonus and ultimate perks that gets reduced by score, it doesn't really have all that much of an effect on the gameplay. So while I appreciate them trying to do something different with the perk system, this really does feel like they were just trying to do something different for the sake of doing something different, not because it actually seems to make any real difference. What does actually make something of a difference, however, is the pretty significant change to the progression system. You see, unlike in previous Call of Duty games where you would just keep playing the game and gradually earn experience points and just level up and gradually unlock new weapons, new tactical and lethal equipment, new perks, so on and so forth, now you will gradually unlock weapon families, and when you unlock the basic version of that particular weapon family, then you will start with whatever the basic version of that weapon family's receiver is, and be able to gradually earn attachments for it like you would with previous Call of Duty games where you had weapon leveling. Only now, when you hit certain weapon levels, you will unlock additional receivers, and then this branches off into multiple different receiver types. So, for example, with the M4, which is the first one that you have access to in the beta, and obviously the first one you'll have access to in the full game, I imagine, you start off with the basic assault rifle configuration in 5.56 NATO, and eventually you will unlock the Recon receiver, which is a 458 SOCOM semi-automatic battle rifle configuration. And that has its own set of attachments that you can unlock by leveling up that receiver as if it were a full standalone weapon. And eventually, through a process of continually unlocking attachments for these various receiver types, you will unlock more receivers, and you will unlock more attachments for the whole weapon family, and actually for all weapons of that particular type. At least in some instances, namely with regard to things like optics. So say you unlock a red dot sight for the M4. That red dot sight will actually be unlocked for any assault rifle from then on out, not just the M4. Same kind of thing for some of the underbarrel attachments and some of the muzzle devices and things like that. The idea with this is that there was a lot of redundancy with that sort of unlocking in previous Call of Duty games, where you would just have to continually unlock the same attachments for all of the various weapons over and over and over again because they each had individual weapon leveling progression. And in this one, you don't have to worry about that anywhere near as much, because you're unlocking these attachments for the entire category as opposed to just that specific weapon. And while I would prefer a system closer to what we saw with the original Black Ops, where you have some sort of tokens or in-game currency or something like that you can spend on the various attachments and weapons that you actually want in whichever order you want, as opposed to having to unlock them based on level progression, it does noticeably cut down on the grinding, even though in the beta we had a very limited selection of weapons and attachments and such to choose from. And unfortunately, some of those weapons didn't have any progression available at all. So to give you a prime example of that, the AK-74U, which in previous Call of Duty games was always considered a submachine gun and is now correctly considered an assault rifle, was not able to be leveled up during the beta, so you had to run it in its entirely stock configuration. Same with the SCAR, as well as the Vector, and the pistols, and of course all the launchers and such like that. Now, the only weapons we were able to mess around with the attachments and such on were the M4 family of weapons, which included seemingly all of the receivers we'll have access to for that particular weapons family in the full game, which are the one you start with, the M4 assault rifle variant, as well as a 5.7mm submachine gun variant, a 458 SOCOM battle rifle variant, a 3-round burst variant, as well as an LMG variant. The other weapon family we had access to in the beta was what they called the Lockman platform, which was basically everything based on the H&K roller delayed blowback type rifles and such. So the H&K G3, the H&K 21 light machine gun, the PSG-1 sniper rifle, the MP5 submachine gun, and the H&K 33 5.56 assault rifle. Or at least Infinity Ward's spin on these, and they were all very well modeled, very well detailed, and actually all felt very good to use. But obviously, with a very limited sample size of attachments and such, it was hard to determine how well this system actually works out, so I'm really curious to see how the full version turns out in this regard. But if the beta was any indication, it actually works out pretty well for the most part. There is the confusion factor of trying to figure out exactly what is going to unlock which attachment for the whole category of weapons or whatever. And of course there's the issue of the UI being a confusing mess that isn't adequately explained to the player, which admittedly is not something exclusive to Call of Duty. It seems to be a problem plaguing most AAA games these days, as if the entire industry has just forgotten how to design good user interfaces. But that's not necessarily a problem specific to Modern Warfare 2, and they can certainly improve it by the time the game launches, although I don't really expect them to. But as it stands, at least as far as the multiplayer experience of Modern Warfare 2 2022 goes, from what we were able to glean from the beta, they seem to be on the right track here. Obviously, there are some things they can improve, But overall, it's basically a more refined and generally somewhat better version of what we saw with Modern Warfare 2019. Is it some massive revolution for the series? Of course not. But after the decent but still disappointing Black Ops Cold War and the downright terrible Vanguard, it does look like Infinity Ward is at least steering the series back into the right direction. So we'll just have to wait and see how the whole thing goes. I'll certainly keep my eye on it, and after the full version's out, I'll see about picking it up and doing a review on it when I can. But obviously I have absolutely no idea when that'll be, especially considering that the game is $70 US now across all versions, because that is the price that they are trying to push for modern AAA games across the PS5 and Xbox Series consoles. And they're also trying to bring that to PC now, which is incredibly obnoxious. And it also really doesn't help that since this is an iterative sequel and is such an iterative sequel, it makes it a lot harder to justify at $70 US, so we'll just have to wait and see how the full version goes with this one. I got plenty of other games to catch up on in the meantime anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and get back to it, and thank you all very much for watching. If you like my videos, please consider supporting the channel on Patreon. All the revenue from that goes directly back into the channel, whether it be getting more games for review, or replacing broken equipment, or getting new equipment, or whatever the case may be. If you can't afford to or don't want to, that's perfectly fine. I understand. But the option's there if you're interested. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all in later videos.